Hi, Ruby. Welcome to Part Maven, Part Maverick. I'm so excited to have you here because we actually met while we were both writing our first books in an author community.
Yeah, it feels like it's all coming full circle.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, to kick it off, so for anybody watching this, right, if they don't know who you are and what you do, what would you tell them about, why they should listen to us speak today?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So, hi, I'm Ruby Ryba. Thanks a lot for having me. And if someone doesn't know who I am or what my work is, I would say you should listen to this conversation because phone use is a universal issue and it's something we can all always grow in. Using your phone in alignment with your values rather than taking the path of least resistance is really challenging. And I kind of think that in this one precious life we have, don't you want to do what you want to do rather than just falling back on your phone? And don't you want to have the courage to go for what you want instead of just scrolling? So I think that's my main mission here.
Yeah, and it's so true that it's really global now. I mean, everyone has a smartphone really around the world. You can go to places where, I've seen people who are living in mud houses or with thatched roofs, but they have smartphones.
Right.
And that's crazy, really.
Right.
So it's everywhere. I mean, to kind of also, writing a book is not something, that you just wake up and start doing. There has to be a very deep drive and something that really keeps you going. And very often, or, could be that it's some form of deep dissatisfaction with the status quo because something is missing, right? You're producing a book, you're producing something new. And I think it's because you feel a certain dissatisfaction or a disagreement sometimes. And so, what is that for you, right? Like, why did you write this book?
So I think being present in our lives is something that I value so much. And also, people living their lives on autopilot instead of intentionally, that's another huge pet peeve of mine. If you were to design your life, would you design your life and include 5 hours and 16 minutes of phone use a day, which is going to total more than 13 years of life? I don't think so, but people just accept things as they are rather than considering what actually makes sense. So that is a huge, almost trigger for me. We have agency and people don't realize that sometimes. For me, there was also actually a specific incident that made me start my book. So I was in St. Louis visiting a friend and I woke up early. I was walking around, and while I went to go get coffee, I was intentionally not being on my phone and just taking in the sights instead. And while I was walking out of the coffee shop, I saw this shop across the street. It was called Provisions, and it wasn't open yet, but it looked really interesting. It had interesting books, it had interesting things. And I thought, I'm going to go back in there later and go check it out. So later, after we had lunch with friends or whatever, I said, oh, there's this store I want to check out. And we went. And it was a beautiful store. It was a mom and pop shop. I got to meet the owners. I asked them how they source their stuff. It was just like a really incredible experience. And if I had been on my phone when I was exiting the coffee shop, I wouldn't have seen the store that was right in front of me, and I would have never had that experience. And that was just such a concrete example to me of the opportunity cost of phone use. That wouldn't have happened. My life changed because I wasn't on my phone. And that's the day I started writing my book. I thought this is something that I don't want to continue to happen to everyone. And I also, one other thing, I believe in the mind body connection. There are a lot of studies that support it. There's a study where people think about an exercise even though they're not actually doing it and their muscle mass increases. Or there's a study where older men were put in an environment that simulated how they lived 2 decades prior, and their health metrics came back reflecting younger physical health. And phone use, it disconnects us from our physical selves, which is a lot more important than people realize. So that brings me back to it's like the opposite of presence. And I just think life is too precious to not be present and to live it. So that's really my fundamental dissatisfaction with the status quo. It's like, you are here, like, take it. It's a gift.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And I try to observe myself when playing squash as a sport. And I've seen two things. I mean, one is we speak about this mind-body connection. One is I sometimes feel like, oh, I'm going to enjoy this. And so I will not try to focus on the game. And then some random thoughts come in and I miss the ball, even though I'm there. There's no justification for missing the ball in those situations. But then I somehow had this feeling like, focus is a limited resource and I don't need to use it when I'm when I'm doing sports. And then I started thinking of it as a muscle, right? If I decide, of course you don't want to like try to be focused 24/7, right? That wouldn't be realistic. But when I'm doing something that I enjoy, that I care about, I just try to, be focused. And you just see with that, with the same level of skill, with the same level of fitness, with the same level of everything, it just raises the bar. And I think, like you said, phone use is the opposite direct, like it takes it in the opposite direction, and so it really messes up your life in all facets. Whether it's sports or what you do at work or
Mm-hmm.
what you do with your family.
Definitely
And
agree.
and I think you just shared this personal trigger for you for writing the book, but just to get to know you better, right? The author behind the book, sort of, do you want to like run us through your origin story and your life story in brief and the key moments that sort of shaped you and made you who you are? And feel free to connect that with what's in the book, right? And what you're trying to do with the book.
Sure. I mean, I've always been a doer and I've always liked data. So when I was a kid and I practiced violin, I would graph how much I practice. I think data is so interesting because it tells us stories, it gives us correlations that are actionable, And I had that experience and then I started writing the book that day. That's always been my style. And I think I consistently challenge the status quo. So when I used to teach high school math, and I took a job partially because I would get to pilot the AP statistics course. I majored in statistics. And anyway, I show up, I teach the first year of AP stats. I also teach algebra 2, 4 sections of it. Fine. Then next year comes around and some of my kids that I taught last year in algebra 2 are in my AP stats class. But a lot of them that I thought were going to be in my class aren't. And I'm a little confused. Then I find out that there's this old standing rule from when stats was offered a decade ago that kids can only take one AP math course. So, if they're thinking about their college transcripts, they're going to have to choose calc over stats because that's the more challenging, rigorous course. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is total bullshit. Like, why is there a policy like this? I've never heard of this. So, I talked to my assistant principal, I talked to my principal, and then while I'm getting to the bottom of it, I'm teaching AP stats after school every day for anyone that wants to be in my class but isn't. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but like stay. And when I get to the bottom of it, it was that the AP Calc teacher was actually behind this because he didn't want his students to take other APs as much as possible to increase his scores. I still remember the guy's name. I won't say it on the air. But I brought this up to admin and they basically were like, oh, right, that is why we knew that. But like, they didn't really feel like dealing with it. And so then the principal found out about my like after school AP stats classes that I'm still teaching because I'm like, I'm going to get these kids in the class. And at that point, I think kids that were not even going to take my class were like showing up for the class in support. And he comes by and he's like, what the heck is going on? And I make my point again. I'm like, it doesn't make sense. They can take calc and physics, but they can't take calc and stats. And I was so mad that I was crying. And they changed the policy. And now you can take stats and calc at that school. And I don't teach there anymore, but you still can. And this story is important to me because it shows also that the policy was put in place to protect a teacher's scores, not the students. But most people say, oh, okay, like, I guess that's like, you can only take one or the other. Like, my question is why? Why can't I? But anyway, that's kind of about, I guess, like my personality. I am a questioner and a challenger. And then in terms of how that relates to tech, I guess the question is the same. Why? Why do I have this cell phone? What is it doing for me? How is it benefiting me? Or is it benefiting others? We live in something called the attention economy. Our attention is valuable. So if you are spending time on your phone and you are finding that valuable, you are doing research that helps you, you're contacting loved ones, that's completely fine. But if you don't really know what you just did on your phone for 4 hours, and it was because you were scrolling and giving people views that they're profiting from, is that how you want to use your phone? So I think it comes back to don't be on autopilot, think about what you want, and then do it.
Yeah, I know that sounds amazing. I mean, especially the teaching part. The reason why I was sipping some warm tea through this was because I started teaching undergrads first year, discrete math and Python programming, and so that really drains your
It's
voice, right, a whole day in front of students.
a lot, yeah.
But I'm glad you fought for statistics. I think there are arguments made increasingly that the world we used to live in, right, the physical world, a lot of physics and engineering in the world of atoms was driven by calculus. But the world we live in today is a lot more about understanding and modeling uncertainty and probability in statistics would be probably a much better foundation for that. And I would even go as far as saying, you have to do probability and statistics, and if you want, you can go and do calculus. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad you fought for that, because I think this is something worth fighting for, and you definitely left a legacy at the school, even though you don't teach there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think being able to understand statistics is kind of the modern version of literacy.
Exactly.
When you're presented with information, can you actually understand it? Or if someone just sticks a statistic in an article that kind of favors their point of view, are you just going to accept it at face value? Or are you going to say, wait, they talked about the median, not the mean. What does that mean? So yeah, I mean, although I wanted the students to just be able to take what they want. It wasn't that I thought stats was necessarily better than calc, but I do think statistics is important. Yeah, and it's a big part of my book also.
Yeah, and that, I mean, and the other thing is this questioning approach to life, and also sort of being able to take a contrarian take. And I think that's the reason why we have part Maven, part Maverick. It's really these useful contrarian takes, and useful is, how do you apply it to your life? And I think this is, it's a perfect sort of foundation for the rest of this conversation. From there, I think before we get into the book itself, I sort of saw a very first draft of your book, and today I completed reading the more or less final draft.
Thank
And
you.
so, and that's always, it's always beautiful to see someone's journey, right? Because the statistics are brutal. I mean, when, we were both part of the useful books community that Rob Fitzpatrick started. And before I started my book, I realized, the statistics are just not aligned with your success. 95% of people, ballpark, who start writing a book, not 95% of the population, like 95% of people who say, I want to write a book and start writing it, don't complete it. And 99% don't end up publishing it. And so, you're really like just a step away from that. And so really, kudos, congratulations. And
Thank you.
this is a great milestone. But do you want to run us through your approach? Because we kind of want to peel back behind this questioning mindset, and the book is kind of an artifact that you produce. But do you want to show us how the sausage got made?
Sure. So yeah, as I said, I started that day in St. Louis. I woke up earlier than everyone else because I have young children. So even if I'm not with them, I wake up early. And I went to get the coffee, and then I had the idea, and I went to the front desk of the lobby of the hotel, and I said, hi, can I have a pen and paper? And I just sat down in the lobby and wrote, so that's how it started. And I had never written a book before. I didn't know what I was doing. I think I got to about 15,000 words when I said, okay, like, I feel like this isn't sequenced correctly. I don't know where to go next. So that's when I started doing some research, and I learned about outlining, and I kicked myself for not realizing that I should have outlined first. And I basically had to start from scratch, although, I could use some of what I wrote, but a lot of it I couldn't. And I think it's just been like that this whole way, where I run into a problem, I try to find the solution. Usually I realize that the solution had been avoidable, but I try to be gentle with myself and say, okay, I couldn't know. And I mean, even recently when I was doing a major self-edit, I had major doubts. I was thinking, God, like maybe I should just stop right now. I'm so done, like tired of this. And, maybe I won't finish this book. So I definitely want to emphasize that thought has, existed from day one. I do think that there's a James Clear quote about how you gain confidence through courage, so you have to have the courage to do it when you don't think you can, and do it again when you don't think you can. The more you do it, the more you prove to yourself that you can, the more empowered you are, the more confidence you have. So while that has been building for me, and I'm certainly more confident in my ability than I was a year ago when I started, definitely when I approach new things, it's scary. But and I also wonder, who am I to write this book? Do I know enough about this? And when it comes to research, you can go into rabbit holes because there's so much information available. You could just put writing on hold for months and just research, finding that balance. But I do think I know enough and I care enough about this, because I think phone use affects our life experience. And that's something that I rarely go 10 minutes without thinking about. So if not me, who, and I just got to keep going for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you definitely deeply care about it, and like you said, there's a lot of research, but it's really also about sort of picking out, curating, and crafting something useful out of that research, right? That's the work.
Exactly.
We're not all sitting and inventing completely new elements or whatever, right? And you mentioned, I think, James Clear, which was, this the famous author of the best-selling book Atomic Habits. I think James Clear is known to have said right at the outset, look, nothing in this book is my original contribution. My contribution is packaging all of that in a useful way for you.
Totally.
And I think this is something that would help anyone, whether you're writing a blog or a book or whatever you're trying to produce. You don't always have to, I mean, this is not, it's not a scientific research paper. You don't need necessarily an original contribution. It can also just be making it useful or crafting it based on your lived experience, which is unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's get into the book. So, I mean, I remember one of the working titles early on was something around doom scrolling. But like, do you have if I have you finalized the title and what is it? And
Yeah, I think my first title was How to Stop Doom Scrolling, and then I
Mhm.
changed it to Scrolling because I realized that it's not just doom scrolling that we might want to be wary of. But sorry, I cut you off.
No,
You
but
can add
I
more.
mean, yeah, thanks for that because somehow the doom scrolling thing stayed in my mind. So I just want to make sure we know what the current title is just before the book gets published. There's something very personal I want to start this with, which is
Mm-hmm.
sleep and scrolling, right? I mean, I struggle. There are certain days where like my mind is just racing all over the place and I'm not able to shut down and restart, right? That's if we were to
Mm-hmm.
characterize sleep
Mm-hmm.
in in tech terminology, and those are like if I had to take a step back and observe myself, those are the moments where I lie down and then five my mind is racing around. I get up again, it's all dark, I keep my phone in the other room like you advise, but
Mm-hmm.
then I walk out, I go to the other room, I start scrolling, whether it's email, Substack, LinkedIn, all the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
where I get information or where I read stuff. I start reading an article. I might start watching a podcast video that I had left off. It doesn't matter what, right? But that it's dark, right? So I make sure I don't have that sort of light trigger, right? The phone is in the other room. There's a whole bunch of things I try to do right, and yet I go through the trouble of getting up when I'm already lying in bed, relaxed, getting up, getting that phone in the dark. And then
Mm-hmm.
I can spend an hour there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really when the eyes cannot take it anymore that I end up falling asleep exhausted. Um,
God. Yeah.
yeah. So
That sounds
it,
awful.
it happens once in a while. Okay. Let's say
Okay.
it's not,
Okay.
it's
So it's
not an
not it's
everyday
not an everyday.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely a problem I have. Right. And this is something that it's very personal. And that's why I'm very glad you wrote this book and love to unpack stuff around this in your learnings. So I think the first thing is attention is a currency. I think a lot of people, this is something you write about, right? And a lot of people don't realize because we think, our money's in our wallet. We know how we're planning our financial future. We think about physical assets. We think about our careers very seriously. We think about our skills. We think about, our hobbies. We think about happiness. We think about a whole bunch of things. What we don't realize is, no one's actively thinking about their attention and their attention span and the amount of attention and how they're deploying it, right? So we live in an attention economy because there are companies out there that monetize our attention, right? And if they are monetizing, right, you say when we lose, so when we lose our attention, if it's me, at in the middle of the night or just, like late at night in the dark sitting and scrolling my phone, something has hacked my mind, right? Like I'm not really in control at that point, not really, not completely. And so if I'm losing, someone else is gaining, right? And this
Yes.
has opportunity costs associated with it. And you write in your book, one day of, every day, 1 hour scrolling before or after sleep, right? So when you wake up, so about an hour a day. If you did not spend it on your phone, you could read 73 books or so in a year, right? You
Isn't that
could learn to
crazy?
code,
Yeah.
right?
People say they don't have time to read. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is something where you see a lot of people and you ask them, hey, let's do this or can we do that, and they say I don't have time. And I don't have time for me is really like we all have the same amount of hours in the day, right? And so I don't have time just means I don't want to do it, right? I don't prioritize it enough. And the other thing then you write in your book is you say why it really hurts to watch other people scroll mindlessly. And so one thing I try to do is when I'm sitting in the dark scrolling, I try to go out of my body. Like I try to imagine I'm a floating in the room and I look down on myself and it's so pathetic when I see myself scrolling. I mean, it's horrible, right? And that's sad, like, and then and I think what you advise is like spend your attention like you would spend money. Attention is the new capital, right? Because the economics of attention is what's driving most of the Mag 7 or whatever they're called, right? And so you say ask yourself the question, who is profiting? So do you want to run us through this framework and how you would help me, for example, get over this issue? How do I calm my mind and deal with this scrolling problem?
Okay, there's a lot to cover here. So, first, with you getting up in the middle of the night, going to the other room to scroll. I mean, first, I would say no one's perfect, and if this happens sometimes, I don't know what your self-talk is, but maybe you don't have to be too hard on yourself and you accept, okay, this happens once in a while. We all sort of have our vices, and you could even argue, hey, maybe 50 years ago the equivalent would have been that once a month you go out in the middle of the night and you smoke a cigarette, and like maybe this is better than that. You know what I mean? Like no one's perfect, and we can't be perfect in our self-care or habits. So first, I just want to put that out there that no one is perfect with their phone use, and maybe it's not the biggest deal if you scroll once in a while in the middle of the night. But if you want to think about how to protect yourself against that, I would think about, you've already put it in another room, and yet you're still going there. So I would think about, what would I want it to look like? People often focus on what they don't want. So they say, I don't want to be on my phone in the middle of the night. I don't want to be on the phone first thing in the morning. So what would you want? So if you woke up in the middle of the night, what should you do instead? Would it be that you go read a book? Would it be that you go take a walk? So you need to think about what the options are, because right now there are no other options, and you have something that you do on autopilot. And then once you decide what you're going to try to do instead, you need to make that accessible. Because the other thing that makes phone use so easy to fall back on is that it's so accessible. And so we just gravitate towards it. A couple days ago, I was taking a train into New York City. I live close to New York City. And when I take the train, it's an hour ride. So I usually think about, what do I want to do on the phone? What do I want to do on the train?
The train.
And so not on my phone. And so, I had a bunch of thank you cards that I wanted to write. So I packed the cards, I packed a pen, and then I did that on the train. But that took planning, prior thinking, reflection, intention of how do I want to spend that time? Because if I didn't, then I would get to the train, I'd say, okay, I have an hour to kill, and I might just be on my phone. And to be fair, I will tell you that sometimes I do spend that hour on my phone responding to emails and like getting through things, but it's because I planned to do that. So going back to the middle of the night example, it's like, if you don't fail to plan to fail sort of thing. If you don't have an alternative, it's not magically going to happen, especially if you wake up in the middle of the night really exhausted. And then when you want to think about, attention is currency. Yes. So what others gain, you lose. So if you are losing an hour in the middle of the night, that is something that you could be doing other things with. I mean, I think for the middle of the night, though, it's probably more detrimental to your health than in terms of an opportunity cost, because it's not like you're going to spend an hour like studying or working in the middle of the night. So I think it's more about kind of body regulation and not wanting to stimulate your body in the middle of the night when it should be resting. I would also be curious to know if that sort of thing happens when you have a certain kind of day. So for me, for example, I noticed that on nights that I work late, like if I am working until 9 or 10 p.m., I have a harder time falling asleep and I have a harder time staying asleep. And so now that I've noticed that, I try to avoid scheduling things late at night, but with Zoom and different time zones, sometimes I have stuff at 8, 9 p.m., but that's something that I notice. I avoid it when I can. And then when I can't avoid it, like last night, I was working till 10. I didn't sleep that well last night. And it's frustrating, but I kind of just have to accept the loss. So, I don't always have a perfect solution. I wish I did, but it's because it's a practice and because there are a lot of obstacles that can get in our way.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's also about experimenting, right? Somewhere in the book, you write about box breathing, right? Where it's like you just count, you breathe in, you hold your breath for the same amount of time, right? And then you breathe out. You count always to the same number, and then you sort of stay empty, like without any breath in you for that time, and then you could repeat the process, right? So that's something I think that really helps. I just tried it just before we spoke for a bit, and I think it works. And for everyone, it might be something else, but I think that's part of the thing. There are some research insights that are generalizable, but a lot of it is just, try and do what works for you.
Yeah, you ideally want to have almost like a menu. Like, what would I do if I have 30 seconds? 30 seconds for me might be box breathing. What would I do if I have 5 minutes? What would I do if I have 30 minutes? And then when you find yourself in that environment, you have these menu items available to you. So that's one thing to think about. I've also just been experimenting a little bit with silence and thinking. We are so used to content consumption constantly. I realize that I drive a lot because I have kids and I'm dropping them off and whatever. And so I would often be listening to podcasts or calling friends. And, that feels productive because I'm talking, I'm either deepening relationships or I am learning more. But then I thought, okay, like, what if I just sit in the car, and just think? And Sarah Blakely, she's the founder of Spanx, really, really successful female entrepreneur. She talks about how she likes to think recreationally and she can sit on a couch and just think for 3 hours. And when I read that, I thought, oh man, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could just think for 3 hours. But like anything, I think it just takes practice. And so recently, I try to start my mornings with silence. And the more you think, it's another muscle, the more you can do, the more you reflect, the more I think about what I want to do tomorrow. It actually does end up helping you be intentional, helps you with manifestation, helps you with so many things. So I think another thing is just being comfortable with empty spaces and not always rushing to fill the void because you can fill it yourself. Like, you don't need a tool or a crutch.
Exactly, exactly. Now, I'm the guy who can sit also 3 hours on a couch, but the problem is that's me actually. It's me lying in bed and my mind racing around. So I'm on the other end of the spectrum. And there's something I try to do, just look for some. Yeah, the breathing thing I think is nice. Is something I
Mm-hmm.
need to do more of
Mm-hmm.
intentionally. The other thing that helps sometimes is just listening to calming music, and I pick some kind of, you know, chants or something from around the world, right? From all cultures, all religions, or whatever, right? There's just everywhere around the world there is music and there is stuff that, sound that just helps you calm down, and that's super nice, and it allows you to switch between different types, but with the same theme, and I find
Yeah.
that so useful.
I totally believe in sound affecting our moods, our mental states, just like how listening to a crying baby or listening to sirens can make you stressed, listening to soothing, calming sounds. And then when you're sleeping or when you're trying to sleep, you can also try breathing and counting down with every exhale, like breathe in 10, breathe in 9, etc. But they do also say that if you've been lying in bed for 15 minutes, you might want to get up, go try do something else. And then because when you're pressuring yourself to sleep, that's when it's
That
hard.
doesn't help.
Yeah, I really liked The Sleep Solution by Chris Winters. That was a book that I really enjoyed about sleep, if you're interested. Um,
Thanks. Yeah, I'll
he,
check it out. Well, yeah, one thing that I'm going to use for this intentionality when I'm trying to get back control of myself from the phone is to remember that attention is capital, right? This is like me frittering away my money, right? I would
Mhm.
I would be very rigorous about how I spend money, and be very selective about what I spend it on so that I'm using the money and the money is not using me. And I think it's the same thing with attention. And instead of obsessing about the device, because the phone is just a device through which the money gets spent, it's like a distribution channel or something. Focus on the currency, on the unit of value, and that's attention. And I think this is something that, because I work in a very like sort of thinking rational kind of way, I think. And if I just tell myself, hey, you're throwing money out of the window right now or flushing
Mhm.
it down the toilet,
Mhm.
that imagery will make me, sort of get back control. So this is something I will definitely try. And so I think you also say you should ask yourself who is profiting, right? So when you are not using your phone and your phone is using you instead, who is profiting? And what's your take on that? And like, how should people think about that? To just make them aware that they're losing control and that someone else is essentially taking it. They're essentially being manipulated, used, taken advantage of in some ways in this new economy.
Right. So when you're spending your attention, you're always spending it, right? So right now we're spending it on this conversation and you are spending it on yourself or on others. And when you're spending it on others, you probably want to spend it on people that you care about, So if you are actually paying attention when your parent is talking to you on the phone instead of scrolling while they're talking and kind of just saying, yeah, yeah. Like that is attention that you're giving them. And when it comes to just kind of random stuff on the internet, if you think about streaming services, there are some where you you pay less per month, but there's advertisements, and you think, oh, I'm saving money. And you're saving money, but you're losing attention. Advertisements work on everyone. It's been proven. They're done so intelligently. I actually, so funny enough though, it's hard to win. I used to have ads on intentionally because I thought that was a good way for me to stop watching TV. Like when the ad comes on, it's easier to be like, oh, okay, I guess the ad's on now, I'll stop. And so that was my thought. But then I was reading more about advertisements and how much they work. And so then I ended up switching to no ads. And there was a time that an ad worked so well on me. I knew it was working on me, but I didn't even care. It was for Dawn dish soap. It's this blue soap and it has these really cute little ducks and they're like watching the people wash the dishes. And like every time they come on, I'm like, oh, they're so cute. And then I was at the grocery store and I don't usually buy Dawn dish soap. I usually try to buy stuff that has like less toxins and stuff in it. But the duck was on the bottle. And I was like, this duck, like I got to buy my Dawn dish soap. I had like loyalty, and I completely understood what was happening, but I couldn't help myself. So it was very interesting. And like, there you go. Like I watched the ad enough times and they got my money. So you are always spending your attention and someone's always profiting. And, maybe with the Dawn dish soap, maybe it was okay. Like I got enjoyment out of the fact that I have these cute little ducks on my kitchen sink, but you just want to make sure you are aware of what you're buying and that you're happy with that purchase. You wouldn't buy shoes that are the wrong size for you. And so don't tune in to stuff that
Spend it
doesn't suit
intentionally.
you.
Yeah, spend it
Exactly.
intentionally, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not saying never scroll. If there's like a hilarious comedian and you love to watch his bits or a podcaster and you love to watch them, by all means, but just make sure you know what you're spending your attention on, for
Yeah.
sure.
No, I mean, for sure. And this is such a cool story. And one of my favorite French rappers said, if they could put ads into our sleep, they'd do that because it's just so effective, right? I mean, it's crazy how it works on you. And this is something with the podcast too. I don't really, there are no ads at all. And I just want this to be a quiet moment of learning, of self-reflection and sharing. And the question also then with shorts, right? Should I start with some kind of hook? So far, I haven't done that, but yeah, let's see. I mean, I think if you watch one episode of the podcast and you get value out of it, the idea is that you come back for the value and you
Mm-hmm.
don't come back because I hooked you through a short
Mm-hmm.
or something, right? I think that's
Right.
something I'm trying out. I don't know how successful it is in a competitive environment, but we'll see. But there's something that I found very interesting, which you shared on one of your other podcast appearances, and this is around the idea of when you have a phone, like you could leave it in your bag or put it away somewhere in another room, or you could just leave it on the table beside you but face down, right? Where in theory you say, look, the screen is not look. I'm not looking at the screen, so it shouldn't matter. And this is something this is something I have to keep pointing out to my students. So when we're doing math and Python programming, like even the ones who are serious, if most of them keep their phone on the table with them. So there's a notebook, a pen, a laptop, or one of these things, right? And the phone face down, mostly face down. And then I tell them, you're not working in emergency services. I don't want to see that phone. I mean, I don't want to see it and I don't want you to see that phone. Just keep it away somewhere, right? And there's always a bit of pushback. And I said, look, we're not in emergency services, period. Like, this is not even a discussion. And when they keep it away, this is just observational. I got the feeling like there is a better focus, a better energy, a better intentionality to everything we do in the class as a group, right? And you found some really interesting research around people doing this over dinner, right? So would you like to unpack that and how, and then sort of highlight how people could apply this to their lives?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really fascinating. It's a concept called counterfactual thinking. So to just explain what that is, two examples. So first example is, let's say you miss your flight. Okay. And when people are asked, would you rather miss your flight by 10 minutes or by 30 minutes? People will say, I'd rather miss my flight by 30 minutes, because when you miss your flight by just 10 minutes or just 5 minutes, you're so close, you can like taste it, like I could have been on that flight. But when you miss it by 30 minutes, it's like, oh, well, I guess I wasn't going to make it. And so it's easier to not feel so terrible. But interestingly, like the outcome is binary, right? Like you either made the flight or you don't. But for some reason, people are less bothered if they miss it by a long shot. And another example would be when you look at, they did studies where they look at the facial expressions of Olympic medalists. When you look at the gold, silver, and bronze, of course, the gold is the happiest, but the bronze medalists are happier than the silver medalists because the silver medalists are like, I could have gotten the gold. Whereas the bronze medalists say, I'm so happy I'm on this podium, you know? And so this is called counterfactual thinking, where you're thinking about an alternative reality that doesn't exist. Counterfactual. It's not true. It's not real. And whatever that alternative reality is informs how you feel about your actual reality. So the closer you feel like you were to something that could be better, the worse you feel about your current situation. Now, the way that that's related to phone use is that when you see your phone face down, the phone has the potential that you could be getting an exciting email with a job offer to your dream job, or a text message from someone that you have a crush on, or whatever. You know, most of the time, your phone is not that exciting. Like that sort of event almost never happens. But because we don't know what's on the phone, and there's that possibility of something that's more exciting than the reality that I'm currently experiencing, it makes our reality feel grayer. It makes us dissatisfied with our real life because we are thinking about this potential, but almost definitely not happening alternative life. So they did a study to see, like, you know, this was a hypothesis that this affects how we experience our real life. So they did this study where they took families and friends, just like groups of people that know each other, and they randomly assigned them to either have their phones out at the dinner table face down or did not have their phones out while they had dinner. Then afterwards, they were asked a series of questions like, how much did you enjoy the stories of the people talking? How much did you enjoy spending time with them? How interesting were the stories, etc.? And across the board, the people that didn't have their phones out enjoyed their experience more. And so that can be explained by counterfactual thinking, that just by having the phone there, even if you're not getting any notifications, if it's quiet, it's reminding you that there's this possibility that something more exciting is happening, and it detracts from your current experience. So that is really, really fascinating to me. And I think this is an example of knowledge is power. If you don't know that, why wouldn't you just leave your phone on the table? It seems innocuous. It seems like it's not going to do anything bad, but it actually can have detrimental effects. And so once you know that, you can use that to help you to enjoy your real life.
Yeah, do send over that paper to me after
sure.
this podcast, and I'll share it with 2 or 3 students who seem to be having more of this issue. I'll ask them to read it. You know, it's a math kind of 101 class. It'd be nice, you know, they can read this research paper and then present the findings to the rest of the class, right? I think just like a 15-minute presentation. And knowledge is power, right? And I think they need to read that, they need to internalize it, and they need to learn to present it. And I think they will get a valuable skill just by doing that. And so that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I get that, because as a challenger myself, I kind of think like, if you don't tell me why, it's hard for me to comply.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Which kind of also, you know, leads to the question, what is a phone, right? Like, I mean, I still remember as a kindergarten kid, I used to live away from my mom. Like, she was working as a doctor in another city. I was living with my uncle and aunt, and so we'd have these occasional calls, and we're still those, you know, landlines where we had a dial for the numbers and all of that. And she would pay, you know, it would be very expensive to make those calls. And so she was paying on her end and waiting and asking me questions, and I would nod, you know, how was your day at school? And I would nod and not say anything, because I'm like, oh, okay, I'm communicating, but I wasn't speaking.
Yeah.
So she had no clue what I was, but I was definitely reacting, and I was, you know, responding. And from there, you know, we starting from there, just in our lifetime, I think we're around the same age, right? From wherever we started, like right now, the phone is just, you know, has bundled so much. Like it's something like an addictive drug or a slot machine in some ways. It's a boredom killer, right? And I'll let you speak about what is boredom and what does that mean, etc. It's also a nice way to seem busy, right? Like, I don't know, if you ride the train anywhere around work hours, you see people on the phone, you've kind of the feeling like they're more productive for some reason, even though they're probably not. But it gives that impression, right? Socially, it's you know, it's almost a complete bundle of everything you need, right? It shows you
Hmm.
the time, it allows you to call others, it allows you to communicate, right? It allows you to pay, it allows you to order stuff. It kind of allows you to do whatever you want. And it's sort of like a gateway to an alternative universe. And I think
Hmm.
that's what you were saying around around these opportunity costs, and also this counterfactual is like the physical phone is like almost like a gateway into a virtual world, and you don't know what's on the other side of that door and at any given moment in time, and that's the slot machine effect, right? So the phone is increasingly bundling everything. What are your thoughts around, is the solution to unbundle it thoughtfully and intentionally? What's your take on that?
I think it's really important. Again, I think it really comes back to thinking about when does it serve you versus when are you serving it. So you want to think of your phone like a tool. And if you have like a tape measure or a hammer, you're not going to panic when you leave the house and be like, oh my God, I don't have my tape measure with me, you know? And so one important thing I think is to try to strive for indifference towards your phone. It's not something that you really want to have an emotional attachment around, or an attachment towards. But when it comes to the fact that it bundles everything, I mean, I think that's just very double edged. So on one hand, it's super convenient. You can pay your taxes on your phone. You can do everything on your phone. And that's great. But as you said, it can really suck you in, and time passes and you don't know where you just were. Like you said, you were like in the portal and now you come out. So I think thinking about what you want to use your phone for, when and why, and if there are certain things that you do frequently on your phone, you might ask yourself if it is necessary to do it on your phone. So if there's something work related that you often do on your phone, is it actually more efficient that way, or is it better to do it on a computer? Same thing with checking emails. People feel like they're really productive to be checking their email all the time on their phone. But there is also a huge cost with switching between tasks. It's called switch cost. And first of all, multitasking has been disproven. It does not exist. We cannot multitask. The term multitask was coined in the 1960s by IBM because computers were, quote, multitasking. Although when you actually dig into that, even computers don't multitask. They are just able to switch tasks at a very fast speed. I think back then it was like 1/60th of a second. Now I'm sure they can switch tasks even more quickly, and they could do that without giving up accuracy or time. Whereas we cannot just switch from one task to another and lose no time. If you go from task A to task B, you are probably still going to be thinking a little bit about task A. That's called attention residue. And so then when you're doing task B, you're not totally focused on task B because you're still thinking about task A. That slows you down, or you make mistakes, etc. So going back to checking your email all the time, if you're just reading your emails, but then you're still marking them as unread and you're not actually replying to them and you're going to have to reply to them later, was that productive? No, it was actually the opposite of productive because you just cluttered your brain with stuff that you're not even dealing with right now. So I think also just kind of like lifting the veil of like, what does productivity actually mean? There's kind of perceived productivity and pseudo work versus actual productivity. And a lot of times, lowering the amount of time that you switch between things is a huge, huge part of that. And phone use doesn't really help with that. It's so easy to just be like going back and forth. That also can lead you to something called popcorn brain. So, popcorn brain is when we are on our phones, it's like popcorn, pop, 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 because you get a notification. So, you check your email and then you get a LinkedIn message. So, you go there and like all this stuff is happening. So, then when you look at your real life, your brain is expecting pop, 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 but your actual life doesn't look like that. And so, you get impatient with real life, which is like crazy. So, again, it shows how much being on our phones can affect our real life. A similar phenomenon is how saturated the colors are on our phone. So when your phone is so colorful, a lot of the videos that you look at, et cetera, are edited. When you look at real life, it doesn't look as colorful, which is crazy, and so that's why a great defense against that is putting your phone on grayscale. So with your phone in your settings, you can change it. And research has shown that when you put your phone on grayscale, your phone use goes down by 50 minutes a day, which is quite a lot. And it's because, we are people, humans, we're attracted to beautiful things. And so when you see pretty things on your phone, you want to look at them. I remember I had a high school babysitter that I encouraged her to use grayscale, and her lock screen was a photo of her and her best friend at sunset. So she puts her phone on grayscale and she's like, oh, but like now this picture's not pretty anymore. And I said, yeah, that's the point, because when it's pretty, it makes you want to pick it up and use it, you know? So, and again, everything has a cost, right? So on one hand, okay, great, that makes your phone look pretty, but it makes your life look ugly in comparison. So which
Wow,
do you
well
want to
said.
make prettier? Yeah. So,
Yeah, I think the grayscale thing is I do use it once in a while in the evenings,
mhm.
but I think let me just put it on grayscale for a month and see how it feels, and then only switch back if I really need to watch a video in higher definition or whatever.
Yeah, there is ways to set up a shortcut. So for the
I have a
iPhone, you can
shortcut, yeah,
the triple click. Yeah,
whatever, three taps
exactly.
and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
So then, yeah, I will admit that I do sometimes forget to put it back on grayscale. So, you know, everything's a practice, but
Correct.
you can only just focus on one little thing at a time.
Yeah, and reading your book, one thing came to mind, which is like, and it's a funny game now, trying to play more and more of, is like, think of your phone as something else. Like, so just replace your phone, and tell you how this idea came up. So like, we go for nah, it's raining, but like, what the weather is good with my wife all through the year. We usually like to go for walks several times a week
Nice.
out to the forest nearby or whatever. And most of the time, I'd say like, above 90% of the time, I don't have my phone on me. Actually, almost never. Like a couple of
Nice.
times I have had my phone on me, but I always leave the phone at home. And that's a nice walk for me because the few times I had my phone, I would end up checking it, even if there's no reason. I know it's in my pocket. I'm trigger happy, right? So the phone is a gun, a revolver, or whatever, right? So think of that as a gun, and like I'm very trigger happy. So if I have it there in my pocket, I pull it out. My wife, on the other hand, always carries her phone. Like it's almost never happen. Like it's the exact opposite, right? Like she's always got her phone. Very rarely she forgets it, but most of the time she has the phone. She never checks her phone during the walk. She might do other stuff with the phone, but after the walk, but not during the walk. And so if you think of the phone as a gun, some people are just trigger happier. Like they just want to take out the gun. You have these people also in movies, right, who are constantly polishing their gun and
Right,
looking at
right.
it, and then I start picturing these people on the subway or on the train to work who are constantly on their phone. It's these guys that are obsessed with polishing and making their gun shine, right? Like
Right, right.
used to be
Interesting
like that.
analogy.
And so I think, yeah, something that I think listeners can try is just observe your life and then just, you know, replace the phone with some object. And, if I was watching a lot of Western movies and, cowboys and all that. And so I came up with this revolver example and I found it quite cool. I said, okay, now, every time I have my phone on me, let me think of it like a gun. And like a gun also has a certain purpose, right? Especially in the wild. And so take it out when you need it, right? Don't just take it out to look at it or to polish it or whatever, right? And now I think let's go to your framework, right? Because your book kind of has an overarching useful framework. And to quote you, you say reliable lasting change isn't created by fighting sort of these enemies in the way enemies representing the lack of attention, what the phone triggers and all of that. So it's not about fighting them head on, but by finding ways to weaken their strength such that they loosen their grip over you, right? And your book kind of goes into how to do that. And it kind of reminded me what I was told by in an Aikido class, right? It was the way of adapting the spirit, right? In Japanese tradition, and the idea is that you don't try to fight the thing head on, you try to use it to win in some way. And your framework, I think, has a couple of steps. I just read them out, and then you can unpack it and sort of bring life, sort of blow life into it. So you say design your environment, right? That's the first step. You say phone configuration. So you design the environment, then you kind of configure the thing itself, right? That's the source. Don't leave vacuum. Fill the vacuum. Schedule your life, right, and living. And finally, identity, values, and self. So that sounds very expansive. Like, do you want to unpack that a bit for the listener?
Sure. So, yeah, as you said, my book's divided in 5 parts, and I go in a way that feels natural. So, first, you design your environment. So, that includes things like where does your phone charge at night? Where do you put your phone when you're working or when you get home from work? Things like that. So, that's your physical environment that you want to design. Once you do that, you can move on to phone configuration. So, again, we often don't question the status quo. we allow all of our apps to give us notifications. So think about, what notifications do I actually need? Which apps need badges? What does my home screen look like? Do I use grayscale? Do I use focus modes? Thinking about all the ways that they're not automated, so you have to put them in, but there are actually a lot of things, adjustments we can make to our phones to make them serve our needs more. So I want to be able to get a phone call from my child's school, notifications from most of my apps, so I can change that. And it takes a few minutes. And I will say that I put it off myself sometimes, when things change. I'm like, oh, I should really turn those notifications off. And sometimes it takes me a couple weeks to get to it, but that's phone configuration. Then once you've so these first two steps, the design your environment and phone configuration, it's about subtracting what you don't need, what doesn't serve you, getting rid of having the phone right in front of you when you're working on your bedside table, getting the pings when you don't want to hear them. But then the question becomes, and this gets a little more challenging, is don't leave a vacuum. How are you going to fill that space with things that are actually important or purposeful to you? And that takes more introspection and thinking. And I think that that's a main reason why people do go on their phones, because it is hard to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I want to do? It's easier to say, I can't do what I want to do because I just spend so much time on my phone. To be asked, what do I want to do? And then to go for it is scary. But I go through some exercises and strategies to think about that. And it doesn't all have to be like an epic grand calling in your life. It could just be, I should unload the dishwasher, and like that's something I'm not getting to because I'm on my phone. So, we can kind of explore the whole spectrum from laundry and dishes to like life's calling, but there are certainly better things to do with your time than your phone, but making sure that those are actually things that you care about, because if you're just filling the time with another time filler, what's the point? And you're probably just going to end back up on your phone. Then we go a little bit into scheduling and living life. So that's part 4. In that section, I talk about dopamine, ordering tasks. So, going from slow dopamine to high dopamine tasks versus the other way around, thinking about your energy levels throughout the day. When are you well equipped to do certain tasks? When are you not? Because I also find that when your tasks are not aligned with your energy levels, phone use can slip in. So if you're really tired and you're trying to force yourself to do some challenging work, you're gonna be like, oh, this is annoying. I'd rather go watch reels on Instagram instead and do that. Or the opposite, if you're like, I'm ready to like get some work done, and then you're like, okay, let me like file my taxes right now, or like go through my mail, like you're gonna be like, oh my God, this is so boring. I don't feel like doing this right now. And you're more susceptible to go on your phone, so thinking about that. And then the last part is about identity, values, and self. So it's really going back to who you are as a person, what your values are, what kind of life you want to live, and then making sure that the phone is not detracting from that. So that's kind of the run through of what you'd get if you read my book.
Yeah, and I think each of these things, right? Like, I mean, kind of when you read it the first time, it sounds super obvious, high level. And I think that's a good thing. But the real value comes from like going deeper and living it. And I think applying it, right? That's where you really get the value. And I think that's where a book like yours is also very useful, because you could almost, like, just like we said, the phone was kind of this gateway into this other world. I think you can use Ruby's book as a gateway into a different world, and just keep that on the desk, right? So like, instead of keeping your phone on the table beside you, keep Ruby's book beside your bed, or
Thank
your
you.
work table. And I think that like, replace instead of replacing the phone with a gun analogy, replace it with Ruby's book. And I think that would be useful, right? And I think it would be the best way actually to kind of use that book in your life and make it better. But to wrap up, I think there's this theme that really stood out, and I kind of noted it down, and it's things like, the costs of constant input. Like, this phone is just this popcorn effect, right? Like, just jumping all the time. Another thing you highlight is you end up outsourcing all your questions. Like, this is something that I, even teaching math and programming, I can't, like, back in school, teachers would ask some classic math questions on, like puzzles and stuff like that, that were in textbooks, but it wasn't that easy to find it and all of that, right? And not all of it was, written out on the internet yet. Today, it's like a click away, it's a prompt away. And so anything that's really been written or studied about is already out there. And so the effort to think is something that you just end up giving up on. It's like the early days where people who moved from blue collar, physical jobs to desk jobs thought was a great thing, and in many ways it is, right? Because it's not as physically intense. But then you have started having back problems and all the other stuff that comes with that, right? And I think it's similar with phones. Initially, it's great. You go like, oh wow, I can prompt the hell out of everything, and we're going to kind of automate everything or whatever. But the point is, this is a muscle too in some ways, right? Like just like you need your muscles to move around, you need to train this guy here up here too, right? And so I think if every answer is just a click away, then what's the point, right? And you're going to let that atrophy, and I think that's sad. The other thing is unwanted thoughts and stressors. I think the news cycle, social media, the whole bunch of stuff here that just stresses you, micro
Mm-hmm.
stresses you without
Mm-hmm.
you realizing it. You forget how to be without content. I think what you said around being quiet and just enjoying nothingness or
Mm-hmm.
quietness. Short form content, you say, leaves gaps. It leads
Mm-hmm.
to misinformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because not everything can be, fit in two sentences or in 90-second or 30-second or 60-second hooks,
Mm-hmm.
right? Videos. And then, algorithms flatten you into a generalization. And I think this is so important, which is that what goes in, right? Just like nutrition, right? You don't just eat any crap that you see around, because what goes in is going to be in some way a part of you. And I had Frederick Heron, who's written a whole bunch, like who's like the creativity explorer. He's written a range of books on creativity. And in one of his chapters in the book, he speaks with a government official in Bhutan. And the person tells him, look, there is consumption where you're just taking in stuff. But then he had another word where he said, it's not, don't see it as consumption, even though it's someone else's work. You see it as you interacting with it or kind of, internalizing. And it's a more respectful way to engage with content. So you don't see it as just, okay, scroll, scroll, scroll. But like you say, okay, you take it, you think about it, you try to be it, try to experience it and do it much more consciously. So if you don't do that, what happens is the algorithms start shaping us.
Right.
And do you want to kind of, on to kind of wrap up the importance and the value of our humanness in an age where more and more stuff is being done by algorithms? Like, what are your reflections on that?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to outsourcing all your questions, I feel like we are almost missing out on the human experience when we do that. So back when I taught high school, I would tell some of my students, and I'd pull them aside, some of my really bright students who know the answers right away, like, I love that. I'm so proud of you. But sometimes, just don't yell it out, because there are people that are like thinking about it and they're about to get there. And then if you yell out the answer, it actually ruins it for them because they were about to get there themselves. And so we're doing that to ourselves by being able to just look anything up. You might wonder, oh, like how long has that church been there when you walk past it, or like whatever. And you could spend, if you're on a walk, you could spend some time thinking about it, or you just look it up and it's done. And then it's kind of like that life that you were just about to live is gone. And I think that that's even true in community or in interactions with others. A lot of times I remember back before we could just Google stuff all the time, you'd be watching a movie and you'd say, wait, I've seen that actor before. And then someone would be like, oh, yeah, the actor, I think he was in that movie. And someone else would say, no, no, that's definitely not that guy. Like, you're thinking of the other guy. Like, it's actually this guy. And you just debate about it because you can't just look it up right away and you're watching the movie. And then maybe like a few days later, someone will say, oh, yeah, I saw the movie and it was actually that guy. And that's just a whole experience that all of you had together. Versus the modern alternative is you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, like, is that actor from the other guy? Someone Googles it. No, he was in that movie. That's it. Like, there was nothing to it. And so again, for me, I always think about what's the trade-off. And it's like, who cares what movie that guy actually was in? Like, you lost the ability to actually like talk about it and discuss it. Like, you're ruining it. You're the student that's yelling out the answer when we could have explored it together. So I do think outsourcing your questions, it can hurt your thinking and all that, but it even just reduces your experiences in life. In terms of unwanted thoughts and stressors, I mean, I think that's something that we've all experienced. I was going to bed the other day and I saw that there was a chess player that died by suicide, and it's terrible news and it's awful. And I wish there was something that could be done about it. But me reading that right before going to bed is not helping anyone, and it's just going to mess with my sleep. So Thinking about how the content is going to affect you, especially because you don't have control over it. If you're reading a book, chances are you know that you're about to read romance or mystery or thriller. But when you're scrolling, you don't know what's going to pop up next. And then you might see something that you weren't expecting that kind of affects your mood. Short form content, yeah, it's so interesting and dangerous and addictive. I think they're on the cusp of actually creating an official diagnosis of short form video addiction, and it affects scores, it affects attention span, it affects and they've been seeing that play out in schools nationwide. So that's really interesting. But then also in terms of the information you actually receive, as you said, it can lead to misinformation because it's going to lead to gaps. I think that's so apparent and obvious with politics these days too. If you see a 15-second clip on someone, are you actually going to know, what their stance is and why? I think most people don't listen to full debates anymore. People used to because that was the only thing you could do. But now that there's a 15-second debate, like clip, people just watch that and think that they saw the whole thing.
If I may hear, since you spoke also about learning and you taught yourself, I think this the question is, when you speak with students today who are not yet out into the real world or the work world or whatever you want to call that, question very often is like, what's my competitive edge, right? How do I how do I set myself up for success professionally? And very often people think, oh, I need to get a better math score. I need to learn how to program, Python better, whatever, right? And what I keep telling them is, yes, all of that everyone has an innate ability. You can get better at something. Some things come more naturally. Some things you have to sweat for. All that is true. And everything we're going to do in the course is important. But there are these other things, just those meta skills on top that will already make you top 10%, right? Which is like show up on time, keep things clean around yourself, be polite, listen when someone gives you feedback, don't get defensive, just listen, reflect on it, internalize it, and then act on it the way you want, right? They're not going to follow up and be like, oh, I told you to do ABCD and feedback, have you applied ABCD, right? That's no one's going to do that. So these just basic things, right? And one of them is like go long form, right? Because when all your peers are more and more conditioned to consume short form, and I'm really excited to see the research that comes out, and I think do share it on socials, because I think this is something that is just starting to get studied and understood. But like when your peers and the world is going short form and you can go long form, that's a contrarian skill that's worth, and that will be valued much higher. Like you said, 50 years ago, everyone was watching long television debates all evening because that's all there was. And so being able to sit and watch a long television debate was not valuable in that market. But in a market where everyone is just watching 30, 60-second, 90-second reels, if you can sit for an hour and listen to something and think about it and stay focused, that's a skill. And so I think having that going contrarian based on how the world is evolving around you is something so valuable.
Definitely.
And
Definitely.
is a super skill, right? It's really something that, irrespective of how good you're at math or programming, if you can stay focused longer, I think you will, in a competitive setting, win against someone who might be much better in math and programming than you in some ways, but whose attention span is 60 seconds or 90 seconds.
And that also ties back into boredom and being able to tolerate boredom. If you are sitting in a 1 hour meeting at your job, I'm pretty sure you're going to be bored for some of it, and that's okay. I've heard a lot of kids, and I still do say like, but I'm bored. And it's like, so that doesn't necessarily mean action is necessary, but we're sort of in a world now where if you're bored, you can fill that right away. If you want a sweet treat, you can have that right away. And every time you give in to what you want immediately, you're practicing not being able to hold out, which can be really detrimental. And as you said,
Just like you said it now, since we use the gun analogy,
mm-hmm.
every time you look at your phone, just picture yourself eating a bar of chocolate, like, I don't know, a Snickers or a Mars, something with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
calories in it. Just picture yourself eating that. And then at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, just close your eyes and picture your obesity level, right? Just because of that. Not because of any other medical, like you could be healthy if you didn't do that, but just picture yourself and do that every day, and you'll see how you will, I think, probably have control over phone use. And yeah, I think, yeah, the last thing would be how algorithms are flattening you into something that's like a general slop, right? Like every time you use your phone, every time an algorithm is manipulating you, every time the phone is using you, in some ways you're being ground into that mean slop of the world, right? Of people. And you stand out less, right? And the value of humans is our uniqueness, our, how and why we stand out, where we spike. So what are your thoughts on that and the importance of that, and especially as a parent? I think that's something probably that matters really deeply.
Yeah, I mean, I think you already really did a good job of explaining how it works and happens. We are actually just much more affected by what we consume than we might realize. There's a reason that, we're all thinking about drinking enough water right now, or we're all thinking about certain things, and it's because when you hear other people talking about it, it becomes something that you think about and focus on. And so when you realize how much what you're consuming affects your thoughts, then that makes the content you're consuming higher stakes. I remember actually, I was watching some upscale real estate show. And I remember in the beginning of the episode, the guy, the male main character was wearing Louboutin shoes as a man. He had like the red soles. And I was thinking like, oh, that's so silly. Like, why does he need Louboutins? Like, and like a lot of the realtors are wearing Louboutins and like all this fancy stuff. And by the end of the episode, I swear to you, like I caught myself, but I was like, oh my God, I need a pair of Louboutins. Like I literally just watched an hour and like I went from why does this guy need that? That's so unnecessary to like, I need a pair because everyone else is wearing them, and it just shows how impressionable we are. So when you take that into consideration, that means that what you're consuming is you're taking on outside thoughts and beliefs that might not be your own. And I do think that to be a happy, purposeful person, one of the things that we all crave is authenticity and feeling seen. And so feeling seen for who we are, not like, picking the shoes that I like, not the Louboutins because I thought everyone else was wearing them. And so one way to combat that is to not scroll as much and to not kind of give into these algorithms as much, because the more we're on them, the more we're going to be fed a certain two-dimensional version of ourselves, which might not actually reflect us, but we might start reflecting it. And then it does reflect us. So it's a little dangerous and just something to
Yeah, the,
consider.
slop is the new swamp, right? Like everyone, like you're sort of drowning into that, and I think anyone you work with will, gets less value from that, like just at a human level even. And I had Dustin Schaefer on my other podcast, and he wrote on LinkedIn about this once, where he said, as you see everyone sort of sinking into that swamp of AI slop, you start wondering, like, where are the people, right? We need, like, the whole value of people is going away, and that is sad. And so the more you kind of come out of that swamp of slop, right, and sort of be yourself, I think, be spike out, that's something that people will appreciate value, and the world will be better for it. So on
I
that
agree.
note, thank you so much, Ruby. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, great conversation.
Lovely. Thank you.